do. Let's see. Everything working? Is all things good? Can I hear myself? Can I hear myself? Yes, I can. Okay, so that means audio is working. Good, 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 good. All right, post these here. Post these here. All right, give it a moment or two. Let a couple early on peeps come in real quick as I take a sip of my coffee and mix it nicely. Mm. A little stir here. All right. All right. Here we go. Is everything correct? It looks correct to me. It look correct to you guys? It looks correct to me. Okay, here we go. Um so so I suppose for a recap. So last time we read chapters 15 and 16, and I believe what happened was Larkta woke up in the Clonfeyar prison, and he spoke with Algoris, an old Clonfeyar sort of wizard, for the first time. And after that, he decides to go back to his own people because he still has this false belief that they will forgive him in the end because he's a naive idiot. But that's not what happens. They end up trying to take him into prison, and then he begs Crypto for help, but no, Crypto can't help him, and so he's put in prison for crimes he didn't really commit, not realistically at least. After the fact, after that, he gets rescued by the Clonfeyar and their little stealth ship and whatnot, and he's taken to their planet of Purgatory for another chance. And he takes the chance and undergoes a vision where he's tempted by Pride, the same one who tempted his father, and denies him every time and sees him for the demon he really is. Afterwards, his form is sort of transformed in a way. Not fully, but he basically looks like he does on the cover. Um, and that is a whole symbolic transformation to show what he's supposed to be. However, though Algoris wants to train him, wants to take the time to train him and to properly educate him in what he is and what he's supposed to do, that time is not being favorable to them for such a thing. In fact, at the very moment, as we last left off, the ships of the UCS are hanging in orbit over Purgatory, having found the homeworld after following one of the Clonfeyar ships, and now are poised to strike against it, a deadly invasion. So, how are we gonna stop? How is it gonna stop? Or how is it gonna be stopped? We'll have to see. But first, we got Chapter 17, Hollowed, which I believe takes place from Crypto's point of view. Get a sip of that fresh coffee here, and let's get to reading. Chapter 17, Hollowed. Shining gold in the fluorescent light from the low ceiling above, the badge in Crypto's hand was like one of the many burning stars in the twinkling sea of space the UCS fleet sailed through. Crypto stared at the small pin of metal, a stylized pair of feathered wings over a shield, signifying the rank of captain. At long last, he achieved everything he dreamed of since his childhood. But at what cost? With a solemn sigh, he fixed the pin back on the collar of his blue and black naval uniform and looked out of the crescent-shaped view screen at the front of the supercarrier's bridge. The goal lay dead ahead in that sea of stars, invisible behind its cloak, but it was there without a doubt. Now he and the other supercarriers in formation simply waited orders in silence. He sat down in the command chair, crossing one leg over another as he leaned on the armrest, and scanned his eyes across the bridge, observing the busy crew members fast at work keeping the ship in formation and ready to serve his every command as if it were an extension of himself. Yet he knew none of them. For the others he trained with commanded their own ships. Those on the bridge, this whole ship, trusted him not because he earned it, but because it was enforced. He tugged at his black and silver captain's sash over his left shoulder and right hip out of a bored, restless discomfort, as if the otherwise comfortable chair he sat on didn't want him there. All these recent events rushed like rapids through his mind, and still he was uncertain whether he made the right choices. His father said he did, so did his direct superiors, and even Caltethus, all at the cost of friendship. Krepto heard the comm system on his chair suddenly start to ring. Someone was trying to contact him. He pressed the answer button on the armrest, and from the side of his headrest extended a small screen. Displayed upon the screen was a live feed of Caltethus sitting in his office at the Capitol building on Chelor. "Sir, you have orders?" Krepto asked. "I do, Captain Rodcrex, and I think I know the perfect way for you to prove that my choice in promoting you was correct," said Caltethus with that odd, robotic voice. He leaned forward on his desk. "I want you to take the assault in your hands." Krepto blinked in surprise. "Sir? Are you certain?" "Absolutely," nodded Caltethus. "You have a full fleet at your disposal, as well as 70% of our ground troops. Even if the Clan Veyar do manage to put up a defense this time, it will take a miracle for them to halt us by virtue of numbers alone. Of course, I know it will be a swift victory, especially under the command of one who delivered us right onto their doorstep." Proudly, Caltethus spoke of Krepto's previous actions, which landed him a promotion in the first place. Caltethus began to speak frankly, leaning back in a relaxed posture as he did. "You know, I never once thought it'd be you, of all people, who'd carry out this task, but you did it with such efficiency and grace. I bet they still have not found the signal bug hiding within Loctus fur that you planted when you visit him at Torosa." It it was not easy, sir." Krepto gulped and looked away. "Oh, I know it was not. It never was meant to be easy. That was the point, to prove your loyalty to our people," said Caltethus with a slow wringing of his hands. "However, that flea-sized signal bug's power source is weak and will run dry in a matter of hours. You had best get the invasion underway before the planet drifts out of detection." God damn it, why can't I speak today? Krepto looked at the screen and halted Caltethus. "Wait, before you go, what if I encounter the traitor?" "Kill him," Caltethus said with a disgust in his tone. "Preferably to the point where there is no body left to bury. Make him nothing more than a regretful memory, soiling the good name of the great conqueror who carried it before him. He is a disgrace to everything the UCS was and is." He enunciated every word down to the letter. Such emotion wasn't common in Caltethus. Normally, the first senator was rather calm and charismatic, but the mere mention of Loctus seemed to dig under his skin. "Sir, apologies if I upset you, but may I ask a personal question?" Krepto inquired, glancing away from the screen for a second. Caltethus was hesitant, squinting curiously at Krepto. "Go on." Did you know Locta once?" Krepto asked with a nervous gulp. Caltethus looked down with a sigh, seeming almost sorrowful at the question, but then shook his head and glared off to the side. "I did once know him well, yes. Very well, in fact. However, I do not know him anymore. He is dead to me. The Locta I knew died some time ago. When exactly, I don't quite know, but I know that he is dead. You will simply put down the corpse that continues to walk like a defiler to his memory." "Were you a friend of Skyreath's, then?" asked Krepto, but he soon realized this was a mistake as Caltethus glared at him with his one eye for an uncomfortable length of time. It was like he was searching for something in Krepto. After a minute of awkward silence, Caltethus blinked once and shook his head. "These questions can wait. We are wasting time. I will leave you now to proceed with the invasion as you see fit." "What if it doesn't go as planned?" Krepto asked. "What if we fail?" Caltethus sighed with irate impatience. He spoke quickly and firmly, as if driving the words into Krepto. "You will either succeed and live, or fail and die. Those are your only options. Either way, you will be hailed as a hero of the UCS. Why do you doubt the Clepathian might and authority over this galaxy? I know you will not disappoint me, Krepto. Dismissed." He suddenly cut the transmission. Krepto took a breath and exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. The plans were in his hands now, and Caltethus was right that they had little time to waste. There was an unsettling feeling deep within his gut, a kind of fear and reluctance, as if what he was about to do was wrong. Horribly wrong. No, he shook his head. He would not disobey the orders placed upon him. His duty was to the UCS, the Clepathian people, and his orders were to carry out the invasion. He stood up from his chair and walked to the holographic projection table behind it. Leaning over the table, he began to draw up battle plans, dragging his clawed finger to create patterns on a simulated terrain map of Purgatory. Probe scans had returned from the world's upper atmosphere, giving detail of its rippling terrain. Most of the world was little more than sparse villages or towns dotting the landscape. There was an occasional city here and there, but one city was the largest. Krepto suspected this one was the center of their power, thus it would be a prime target. Remove the head, and the body fell. Still, the more he looked at the map, the more his doubt churned within him. This did not seem like a world of tyrants and monsters, but of simple farmers and fishers for the most part. Krepto suspected such a so-called menace would have lived on some kind of fortress world surrounded by a blockade of warships. In a way, he hoped they'd prove him right and surprise attack them with a trap, revealing some kind of mulligan that turned the tide. He hoped that he would not be defeated, but have a reason to believe his orders were justified. Here he was about to invade and ravage a land of largely natural world. He was to raze this walled city to the ground and claim the whole world under the banner of the UCS. This wasn't a war of defense anymore, it was a war of conquest. This wasn't what he signed up for, but he had his orders. And what choice did he have but to follow them, even if it meant betrayal of his faith and his friends? With the battle plans drawn up, he went back to his seat and activated the intership comms. Field Lieutenant Rushjim, report to the bridge for briefing. He hid the unnerve in his voice as he spoke, then proceeding back to the table. As he awaited the arrival of Scream, who also received a massive promotion for his turning over of Locta, Krepto stared at the holographic projection. It was like a canvas waited to be painted with blood, an art of cruelty wrought by his mind, his betrayal. At long last he realized that the betrayer the tome spoke of was not some stranger, or even someone else he knew. It was him. He was the betrayer, selling his soul to his nation against the will of the very creator he once silently professed faith in. He wondered if such a sin were even possible to forgive. He moved like an animated corpse, for as far as he knew, he was already dead, already damned by the fires of judgment approaching fast on the horizon. He betrayed not just the creator, not just his friend, but also his own people in a way they had yet to realize. The badge he wore was not his, neither. The badge he wore was not his, neither was the respect of the crew aboard his ship. In silent guilt he moved, hollow like a body with no soul. His ruminations were soon broken by the sound of a door hissing open at the rear of the bridge. Scream had arrived. Walking tall and proud, boasting the new insignia upon his collar, Scream saluted Krepto. "Captain, you requested me?" he questioned with a smug tone and slight smirk. Ignoring his own bitter feelings towards Scream for now, Krepto immediately went straight to business. "Yes, I've been put in charge of organizing the invasion of Purgatory. Surface scans reveal there are many orbital defense cannons, likely rendering fire support and bombardment impossible," he spoke in an almost flat monotone. "Would those cannons not be ancient and outdated?" Scream asked, folding his arms as he paced towards the table where Krepto stood. Looking at Scream through the translucent hologram of Purgatory, it took every ounce of restraint for Krepto not to mock Scream for his idiocy. "The very ship you're walking in is over 5,000 years old, some of them in this fleet even older. Our military hardware hasn't changed much since the last days of the Clepathian Empire," he said, then directing Scream's attention to the map on the table before Scream could say something annoying in retort. "We will invade the valley at grid 3284. That should be a wide enough basin that will give us direct line towards their largest and most well-defended settlement. We get rid of it, and the rest of the planet should fall with little resistance." "Taking the path of least resistance, eh?" Scream seemed disappointed. "Yes, Field Lieutenant, that is correct," said Krepto with a roll of his fatigued eyes. "I'm not sure why you'd expect anything else when we've used the same plan in every battle prior. Deploy infantry from orbit, charge the objective, establish foothold, take the planet, move on." Scream held his palms out before him defensively. Fine. Relax, will you? Though you'd think these lizards would at least try to change their strategy and challenge us, but they don't, oddly enough. It's almost like they want us to win." "That's what I fear," Krepto muttered to himself. "Huh?" Scream questioned what he said. Krepto shook his head. "Nothing. Are the infantry ready?" They are eager to spill lizard blood," Scream said with a grin as Krepto turned back to the chair. "Just as I am eager to spill the blood of that traitor. I can't wait to turn my styluses black from his suffering," Scream continued, causing Krepto to halt his steps. Scream began to pace around behind Crypto. You know, I can't believe someone like you once called yourself his friend, Scream went on. It must have hurt you so much when he betrayed you. Crypto clenched his fists, trembling with rising anger as Scream went on and on behind him. Of course, I wouldn't expect someone so defective, so inferior, to know what it's like to fight for something greater for himself. Not like us, not like the great and proud UCS. All of a sudden, Crypto whirled around and smashed his fist into Scream's face in an explosion of rage. Scream stumbled and fell over backwards against the rear wall, his nose bleeding as he held up his right hand over the painful bruise. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Scream shouted up, catching the attention of the rest of the bridge crew. Breathing heavily as the rage and anxiety seethed through him, Crypto cursed everything and everyone around him. "You! All of you! You're all hypocrites! We're all hypocrites! The UCS, its army, everyone!" Crypto shouted in a fit of emotional upheaval, then directed his attention at Scream in particular. "You say we fight for something greater. Well, all I see now is that we're fighting for the continued suffering and bleeding of our own people under a crushing weight of greed and a jagged blade of vanity." Crypto stormed towards Scream, picking him up by his collar and staring him in the eyes as he slammed his back against the wall. "I hope you believe in a savior, because you're all going to need one after what's done here," he snarled before letting him drop to the floor. "What are you talking about?" Scream growled as he stood up. "I think you've been reading a little too much of that mystic garble. It's gotten into your head, Crypto, made you insane. Look around you at the UCS, the Clepathian people who rule over this galaxy as its rightful owners. Do you think it's by faith or principle that it was given to us like one of those fairy tale miracles? No, it was by the laws of nature, the strong crushing the weak as our ancestors drove out the inferior from our lands," Scream spat. He shook his fist at Crypto. "Do you not see that faith is for the weak-minded and the cowardly, a refuge for those who are afraid of their well-deserved death for being the miserable weaklings they are?" "That's what your bestial-minded philosophy fails, Scream." Crypto shook his head and turned away. "Do you have any idea the amount of strength it takes to maintain such a conviction in a society like ours, where selfishness and apathy towards the well-being of one another runs rampant? I have seen people ostracized and even beaten for helping the needy, and others rewarded and praised for exploiting them. Do you know how much courage it takes to confess your faith in the presence of those who wouldn't hesitate to crucify them for their beliefs? No. You and nearly everyone else in the UCS are the true cowards who, out of fear, hate the possibility of a higher being judging your actions. You, also weak as to be unable to live without your materialistic pursuits," he chastised bitterly. Scream peered at him in confused disgust. "And you have the ground to stand on, judging all of us on a pedestal of moral authority?" Crypto shook his head, sighing bitterly as Scream's words stung him true. "No, I don't claim to be better. I've simply become aware of a sickness I should have seen earlier when I had the chance." He closed his eyes as they began to water. "I should have listened to him more than I did. But like all of you, I am infected too. Like all of you, I will pay the debt we owe, perhaps even more for my hypocrisy." He looked back over his shoulder at Scream, guilty sorrow spelled across his face. "I suggest you start believing in the Creator, Scream, because you're about to meet him." Scream and Crypto locked eyes with each other, hatred in both, but for different reasons and from different sources. Scream hated that which threatened to loom over him, but Crypto's hatred came from within. He hated the UCS, hated more than that. He hated the UCS, but more than that, he hated himself for being a part of it now. He hated for being too cowardly to do what was right, even if it meant treason. Now he knew what Locta once felt, understood why he acted and thought the way he did, but there would be no one to rescue Crypto. There would be no more prophecy for him. He was simply the betrayer, and he would reap the poison harvest he sowed. He looked away and hung his head low as he spoke again in monotone. "Rally the troops in the main hangar. I would speak with them before the battle begins." "As you wish, Captain," Scream growled before storming out of the bridge. Crypto stared at him until the doors closed and he could hear his steps behind him no longer. He looked back at the officers on the bridge. "Commander, you have the bridge until I return," he said to one of the officers. "Yes, Captain," said the commander as Crypto proceeded towards the elevator to his right. He stepped inside the elevator, pressing a button for Deck 2, the main hangar deck. Within a matter of seconds, the elevator reached the deck just below the command module, and Crypto walked out into the narrow corridors with his hands behind his back and head hung low. As he walked towards the hangar, passing by many busy crewmen, he thought about what he should say to the troops. He never was good with speeches, so he figured it best to keep it short and simple. Alas, how could he hope to inspire anyone when he was just beginning to hate everything he had become, everything the UCS stood for? What inspiration was there to gather from one so defeated? Nevertheless, it was his duty, and Krepto always followed his orders. He tried to mentally convince himself that what he was doing was for the good of the Clepathian people, and, though he'd like to believe that, his innermost self knew he was wrong. Soon, however, the invasion would begin, and there was no turning back now. Just as Keltetta said, alive or dead, Krepto would be a hero either way. Perhaps that was all that mattered, he thought. Let me check something here. Okay, I think seems we're good. Approaching the main hangar, Krepto took a left up a maintenance stairway leading to the catwalks and crawlways suspended over the hangar. Normally, they were used for ship maintenance, but he used them now as a convenient balcony to deliver a speech from. After ascending the stairs, he proceeded through another door, and he was out on the catwalks. Already, soldiers were rallying below. For all of Scream's faults, there was one thing he was good at: working quickly. By rows of 8, each squad organized in columns in a perfectly organized block formation below, eventually taking up almost the entirety of the hangar. When the last soldier stepped into line, Krepto cleared his throat, stood up straight, and began. Soldiers of the UCS, carriers of our black, white, and blue banner, before us awaits what I hope will be the last battle we must face in this now 2-year war. If you're expecting a grandiose or inspiring speech from the likes of me, then I apologize beforehand. I never was good with words, so I'll keep this simple, he said loud and clear to all standing below him, his speech broadcast out to the other ships in the fleet as well. Our duty as soldiers is something I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about. Sometimes I wonder where our loyalties truly lie. Is it to our orders, pieces of intel gathered and regurgitated onto us by our superiors? No, I say, Krepto said, in a way almost speaking to himself. As soldiers, be it infantry, navy, mechanized, you name it, our purpose is service to something more. As soldiers, we do what we must, not because of accolades or medals, neither promotions or matter of pride, not even the waving banner flying over Chelor for 25,000 years now. We do what we must, fight who we must, for one sole thing greater than all the treasure in the universe: our people. I wish all of you to think of those back home now. I wish all of you to think of those back home from now until the battle's end, and ask yourselves what you truly fight for, and is it worth dying for? Is it worth killing for? When it comes to protecting the future of our people, the Clepathian people, I say it is. Be it UCS or another flag in future time, it is our sovereign duty not to bask in the shade of trees already planted, but to plant seeds for trees that future generations may enjoy, as our forefathers once did for us. All of us have our calling to life, and all of us will eventually have our calling to death. I want you all to think about the future long ahead, when you are lying on your deathbed, about whether or not the seeds you've sown will bear fruit that will nourish, or a fruit that will poison. He spoke to them, many of them looking up at him in confusion at the odd speech. He could see by the looks in their eyes that they heard, they listened, but they did not understand. He took a breath and concluded his speech, unable to hide the regret laced in his tone. Our invasion begins in no less than 5 minutes. Remember what I said here today. If our cause is truly righteous, then we will have nothing to fear. But if we are wrong in our purpose, then know that the blame lies with me. He gulped, swallowing his fear, for he knew what was coming for them all. Prepare yourselves, soldiers. The judging hour is nigh. Krepto finished his speech and departed back to the bridge. Below, Scream was also there, listening to the whole speech. He could hear the doubt in his voice. It disgusted him, reminded him of Lacta. Why Caltellus would put the invasion plans in his hands was a mystery. If Scream had it his way, he'd torch the entire world and carve his family seal upon its surface, establishing a legacy for eons to come. Unfortunately, he'd have to settle for spilling the blood of the traitor for now. You heard the captain. Get to your ships, Scream commanded, his voice echoing through the hangar. With the rumble of hundreds of Clepathians marching into the transport ships docked in the hangar, and with Krepto sitting at the bridge, bearing a knot in his gut and staring at the world of purgatory coming into view as they pierced the cloaking range, the invasion began. Within a few minutes, hundreds of thousands of transport ships began to flee the hangars of the supercarriers. They swarmed like hornets towards the surface of the green world. And yet, to Krepto, all was silent. The silent vacuum of space was an ironic tranquility to the firestorm about to unfold. And so it begins, Krepto whispered. The transport ships tore down through the atmosphere, streaking like comets of flame more numerous than the raindrops of a thunderstorm to the green surface below. By the hundreds of thousands they landed. By the millions the UCS army stormed out into foggy, early morning valley where the dew on the grass still glistened in the fog lamps of mechanical beasts offloading their payload. Scream was among the first to trample on the damp grass, and as the last of the transports landed, he immediately pulled his comms device from his hip and extended its antenna before speaking into it. Field Lieutenant Rushjim to Captain Rodcrex. Landing zone's already clear. No sign of hostilities, but visibility is low. He spoke clearly over the many shouting officers and soldiers, his predatory eyes scanning the horizon. Roger that. Form up and prepare forward march to the city at the other end of the valley. Maybe we can intimidate them into surrender, said Krepto from the command chair of the Teleclix's bridge. Also, keep this line live and open. I want to hear everything that goes on down there. Clear? Hesitantly, Scream obliged. Clear, sir, he said with a roll of his eyes, clipping the active comms device to his belt. With the poor visibility made worse by the mass of other soldiers, Scream looked to a landed transport at his left. He climbed up the side of its hull, something usually forbidden by all except the pilots and maintenance crew, until he found himself standing atop the armored mechanical beast. Using his binoculars, he looked around as far as he could see, but the fog was too thick to see much further than their landing site. Scream switched the filter in the binoculars to direct heat instead of visible light, and this time when he scanned, he saw something outside of the fog. He blinked and leaned forward, looking with his bare eyes once more before using the binoculars again, and realizing that this was someone. I've got contact, Scream said, not taking his eyes away from his binoculars. How many? Krepto's voice buzzed up from the comms on his hip. Scream put the binoculars back and took the comms device from his hip as he stared at the silhouette approaching them through the fog. Just one, he said quietly. Others among the army began to notice him as well, and when he left the fog entirely, standing alone with that black blade in hand before the entirety of the invasion force, Scream knew who it was. They all knew who it was. Scream stared into his eyes and snarled as he stared up into his. The defect. Krepto gasped to himself. Feeling a shiver of dread race down his spine at the judgment to come. Lakta. Hello, Mushhog. Good to see you. Welcome on in. Again. Hope you're doing well. Alright, so that was chapter 17. So, recap that chapter. Krepto is feeling a bit remorseful for his betrayal of Lakta, having when he visited him in the prison, actually planted a bug on him in knowing that he would be captured and set free. Or not captured, but set free from the prison and taken back to Purgatory. And through that, they found Purgatory, and now the UCS invasion force, with most of its army, has landed on the surface, intended to end the war in probably all of Clan Arcane once and for all. However, in the fog of the early morning, Lakta has stepped out and intends to confront the UCS forces. How he intends to confront them, we're going to find out. Again, I'll be usually reading chat between chapters and whatnot, so if I miss something that's said, I will try to catch up on it then. Unless it's urgent, like absolutely urgent. Chapter 18. Rest for the Wicked. There he stood, Lakta, alone before an army numbering in the millions in the foggy spring morning of the valley. They stared at him, his black blade, his strange armor, and his altered form with apprehension, confusion, disgust. Scream stood atop one of the transports from afar, staring down at him, and when Lakta looked into his eyes, even from where he stood before the might of the UCS, Lakta sensed his fear. Scream stood tall in a gesture of power and pride, betraying that which drove him, his arms folded and his face a disdainful scowl. Like the pompous, hubris-filled specimen he was, it was Scream who spoke first. And so the defect has returned to us again, even more hideous than before. Have you come to lay down your weapon and turn yourself in yet again? Or have you come here to die? I'll be honest with you, I'd much prefer the latter. Scream jutted out his silvery styluses, but Locta did not so much as flinch, even with a whole army staring him down. I've come for neither, Scream, and I'd advise against trying to kill me here and now, said Locta. All of a sudden, thousands of Clonfear clad in engraved armor appeared out of thin air in a circle around the Clepathian army in the valley. Their glowing blades of energy pierced the dark, misty morning with a golden-white hue. Though their numbers were far fewer, the UCS forces were packed too tightly to maneuver against them at full strength. Those towards the center could not reach the front. Locta looked to the Clonfear nearest him and then back up at Scream with a disdainful frown, or with a dissuading frown. You are surrounded and cannot win even with your numbers. But I do so not because I ask for your surrender, but to force you to listen to what I have to say. I wish for all to open your mind just for this once, and perhaps we can come to a better conclusion to this wasteful distraction of a war, a peaceful conclusion. Let's not fall into the abyss of fear-driven hate, but rather build a bridge towards each other. Scream mocked Locta, all the while Crypto listening on the conversation. Like you of all people have any right to talk about building bridges when you so readily slaughtered their kind by the dozens. Now you stand with them, brainwashed and mutated. No, Scream, I have seen the truth. I once hated them with every ounce of my being, but now I see everything we've been led to believe about them is false, Locta claimed with a denying shake of his head. It's all a game, one they played along with to lure me out so that they could open my eyes to reality. And what reality is that? What makes you so special out of all of us? You sound like a brainwashed cultist, sneered Scream. Locta held up his left hand. Brainwashed? I could say the same about you. Behold! He then engulfed his hand in holy flame, displaying the magic in front of Scream and all the others standing before him. The Clepathian ranks fell into muttering whispers, not understanding what they were seeing, just as Locta did not understand when he saw the flame of the mystic. Scream blinked in astonishment, but then brushed aside what his own senses told him. Bah! Your little light-bright illusion means nothing. Ignoring Scream's retort, Locta instead addressed the rest. The truth is that you all have been lied to, manipulated by the masters who hide in the shadows. This war between Clepathian and Clonfear is nothing more than a distracting prelude to the true war we sit on the eve of. It is a war not of blades or cannons alone, but a war of the mind, heart, and spirit. I offer my hand in peace, the Clonfear as well, and ask you all to give them just one chance, he cried out to the army. As Locta spoke, Crypto heard every word from where he sat aboard the Teleclix, and the guilt in his chest swelled even further as Locta spoke. Are you all honestly willing to die for a nation you don't even know? Are you willing to bleed and kill for a nation who has turned its back on you and all you love back home? You're fighting for a nation that died long ago. The UCS is no longer the pillar of freedom and hope it once was, but a corruption of what happens when we as short-sighted, small-minded mortals try to rule like gods on our own. All we can rule is ourselves in the end. You've all seen it within the greed and selfish pursuits of those back on Chelor, Losor, Rigna, or whatever planet you hail from. But just as there must be consequences of free will to exist, so too must there be choices. Crypto cradled his head in his hands, leaning forward and shaking his head as tears of remorse welled in his eyes. There was choice indeed, but he had chosen wrong. Now he and all the others would pay their due price. In contrast, Scream below only felt anger boil within him as Locta attempted to dissuade those out from under his control again. There is still a choice for you, all of you here, Locta pleaded with those before him. You can choose to continue to fight, to try and slaughter me and everyone else here, or you could choose peace. A new dawn where both our peoples can see the true evil threatening us all. Though we are different in flesh, different in our cultures and peoples, perhaps it is not those differences which we should hate, but the differences we should cherish and preserve. Perhaps our differences exist for a reason, and it would be a terrible tragedy for either of us to lose what makes us unique and beautiful in this universe, said Locta, stressing his point as he pointed his black sword to all those before him, staring them in the eyes. Make no mistake, I'm not asking for us to put aside... Make no mistake, I'm not asking for us to put who and what we are aside, or surrender to each other, such as apathy and denial of reality. But I am hoping that you can all see that, beyond the flesh, we are all together in this as mortals. The real war is not about Clonfear, Clepathian, or any other sentient out there in the cosmos. It is about the fate of every living being in the universe from now until the end. What makes us different and beautiful in our own ways can either be preserved or cast aside forever into eternal darkness, never to be seen again. All of this will be decided here at the end of the Age of Silence, and our choice. What will you decide? Locke finished, clutching, Locke finished, clutching the hilt of his sword as he struck its tip in the damp ground. Crepto, upon hearing Locke finish his proposition, felt a small ray of hope beam through him like an ounce of warm light. Perhaps not all was too late after all. Perhaps he could change the course of time. This was his last chance, but all of it depended on whether or not Scream would listen as well. He opened his comms to Scream. "Field Lieutenant, come in." Scream, still staring at Locke, picked up his comms device and replied, "Yes, Captain?" He questioned through gritted teeth, not taking his eyes off the one standing before him and his armies. Taking a deep breath, Crepto gulped before he gave his order in defiance of Caltethus. "Listen to me very careful. I want you and your men to stand down." "What? Are you insane?" Scream snarled into the mouthpiece of the comms device. "Are you deaf and blind? The Clonfeyar clearly don't want to fight. Maybe we can reach an agreement. There's no reason to keep up this genocide," Crepto reasoned. "This isn't a war. It never was. It was just a scheme for those who rule over us." Scream looked down at his soldiers, then back at Locke. No, you've lost it, Crepto. Caltethus made a damn mistake putting you in charge of this operation." "Scream, don't!" Crepto pleaded with him. However, Scream was having none of Crepto's pacifism. "The Clonfeyar started this war, and I'm going to finish it in a way a good Clepathian should. We're born with blades of war for a reason. Our bones gleam like shining armor. It's in our blood to fight, just as it's in the blood of the weak and defective to die." Scream hissed before turning off the comms device and crushing it in his hand. Tossing the pieces to the ground, he glared down at Locke with eyes lusting for blood. "Scream! Scream!" Crepto meanwhile shouted aboard the bridge of the teleclicks as the comms line clicked off. "Damn it!" He slammed his fist on the console of his command chair, the eyes of all those up on the bridge staring at him in confused fear at his outburst. They did not know what he knew. They did not understand as he did. For that, Crepto could not blame them. All he could ever blame was himself. And now it was time for him to reap his fields of failure. Crepto looked to the crew of his ship. "All of you, abandon ship." "Sir?" the commander asked. "I said abandon ship!" exclaimed Crepto. "You have your orders, now go! Get moving!" Sounding the alarm to abandon ship, the commander and all the other officers on the bridge got up and left their stations. Crepto opened a communications channel to the rest of the fleet. "All ships, return to base." "What? Captain, what's going on? Why are there escape shuttles fleeing the teleclicks?" questioned the other ship commanders. "I said get out of here! Leave! If anyone asks, tell them Crepto Mrodcrex is dead." He closed his eyes as they began to wet with tears, reaching for the pin at his collar and pulling it off. "Tell them that he made a mistake, and he paid the price." Crepto finished, closing the transmission before they could respond. He looked down at the captain's pin at his hand, frowning in disgust before hurtling across the bridge. It was not his to own. It never was. As indicated by the many blips on the heads-up display at the end of his chair's right arm, the fleet around began to pull back away from Purgatory. Crepto then stood up from his chair and paced over to the fire control station. There he set the main batteries of the teleclicks to target both foe and friend. He was going to die as he lived, a betrayer. He betrayed his people through betraying both the friend and the creator. To do what he was doing now, as he sat at the helm station of the ship, was a mercy compared to the judgment to come. He knew he'd burn for what he was about to do, but, in a way, knowing that he'd be brought to justice gave him peace. It was the peace of a grave, cold and silent. He inputted the course and let the planet's gravity do the rest. The teleclicks would continue in autonomous bombardment while ramming straight to the ground. The red flashing letters of the console screamed at him in warning. Time to impact, 30 minutes. With any luck, none would survive. Least of all himself. Unaware of what was occurring far above the atmosphere of the world, the armies of the UCS continued their stare-down of Locke and the Clonfeyar surrounding them. Locke picked up his sword, holding it upright before him defensively. He knew that look in Scream's eyes, the same look he gave him so many times before. "Don't do something you'll regret, Scream. Please." Locke tried to dissuade him. Scream looked down to his soldiers, towards the Clonfeyar standing silent in formation around the Clepathian army in the misty dark morning, then back to Locke. Soldiers of the UCS, I'm afraid we have new orders from the good captain above. Our orders are not to take this city. Locta listened, hoping that maybe peace could be brought this day, but as Scream spoke further, it was not to be. But to burn this whole planet to ash! Scream suddenly shouted, the soldiers in ranks jutting out their stylluses all at once. Kill 'em all! Leave none alive! Clan Vayar, defend yourselves! Locta shouted back. From there, it all happened so fast. Clopathian and Clan Vayar charging at each other, clashing with one another in a flurry of sparks and explosions. Magic from the Clan Vayar and energy rifles from the UCS danced through the air in a lethal ballet, while blades of hard light and metal sang their bloody song into flesh. Locta was caught in the middle of it all, confused and afraid at this unwanted chaos until suddenly Clopathian struck at him. Forced to defend himself, Locta parried the blow to the side. Stand down! I don't want to fight you! Locta tried to speak sense into his assailant. Die, treasonous mutant, die! The soldier spat at him, refusing to relent. With his instincts and training snapping him into action, Locta evaded his next strike and drew the blackened tears across his gut, the soldier's silver blood spilling out onto the ground. He killed him. He killed one of his own kind. This wasn't right, but he had no choice. He looked around at the horrors of battle, blood spraying this way and that from both the Clan Vayar and Clopathian alike, screams of agony and death raking upon his ears. He didn't want to fight, but he knew that if he did not, then there would be magnitudes more death than what occurred here. Locta sought to end this bloodshed quickly, and so he raised the blackened tears into the sky and channeled his newfound power into the blade. It shined as bright as a lighthouse. The signal was sent. Over the cries and shouts of the battle in the valley, from the forested mountains to the east and west, came a whirlwind screech of jet cycle engines. Thousands of Clan Vayar atop the mechanical steeds raced down the mountainside, to the front with light blades in hand and a cavalry charge at the UCS flanks. Within a matter of minutes, the UCS ranks were already being torn and scattered into disarray, unprepared for the skill of real Clan Vayar, with a surprise jet cycle assault ripping through them like thousands of claws glowing through the night. Their arrogance from having it easy in false battles, their inexperience after not having fought any true battle for thousands of years, all turning against them, but Locta knew it was not enough. They would still fight to the last for their country unless their leadership were broken, and that's when Locta knew how he must end this battle before more lives were wasted. With the blackened tears at the ready and faith in victory in his heart, he pushed aside his fears and charged deep into the fray. Dodging strikes of one, parrying another, Locta defended himself as he speared his way towards the center, making any kills necessary as quick and painless as possible. Each wound his sword carved in their flesh instantly seared and cauterized as if the blade were hot as the minute it was forged. In the heat of battle, however, there was little time to consider why, and so he pressed onward. Clan Vayar joined him at his side as he advanced, and within minutes they often died by his side. The very ground turned into a muddy slush by the life fluids leaving the bodies of both Clopathian and Clan Vayar alike, a gruesome sensation beneath Locta's feet rendering it difficult to keep his footing as he charged and fought. At long last, however, he finally laid his eyes on the one whose very being radiated with an aura of hatred stronger than any around him. Scream stood near one of the transport ships which had become stuck in the mud from a lost Clan Vayar high blade thrusting in its engine. Locta hesitated as he saw him slaughtering the Clan Vayar charging at him. Off came the head of one as he impaled the heart of another and slung its corpse off his blades. Two on jet cycles charged him, but stretching out his arms at a precise moment, he let their own speed carry their necks across the razor-sharp edges of his stylluses. Their jet cycles crashed together in the dirt behind him before another ran at him from behind. And to this one, Scream simply grabbed him by the throat, threw him to the ground, and crushed his neck with a stomp of his foot. "Come on, then! Is that all you've got?" Scream cried out to the sky, and then noticed something glowing high above. It was distant, faint, not like any star as it gradually appeared to grow in size. However, his confusion was interrupted when a familiar sense of hate and fear spurred in him. Locta was near. He spun around and lashed out behind him, only to find his strikes halted, clashed against that massive black sword. Locta glared at him, and he at Locta both held disgust in their gazes, but for different reasons. Without a word and only a growl, Scream raised up his blades and broke into a flurry of metal and rage. Locta was almost immediately forced on the defensive, parrying strikes from the left with his overhead to the right. But when he came in for a follow-up, Scream already brought his other stylluses down upon Locta. Fortunately, the blow glanced off his left pauldron, allowing Locta to leap back and gain some much-needed distance. "That armor won't save you forever, defect!" Scream shouted. It was clear that Scream had grown not just in rank, but in his own skill while Locta was gone. I've been practicing for the next time we meet, Locta. You won't survive this one. Your armor will break, your bones will shatter, and your blood will paint my hands. Taking deep and heavy breaths, Locta wiped the foreign blood from his face and gripped his sword tightly. That's what you fail to understand, Scream. I don't fight with armor and weapons alone. Suddenly, the blackened tears shined over with bright light, leaving a trail of magic through the air behind it as he swung it at Scream with more speed and grace than ever before. The blackened tears felt almost weightless in his hands now as his belief and conviction channeled through it. Shocked by the sudden display, Scream was now the one force on the defensive as Locta's strikes were like a tornado of searing light. Raising his stylus overhead, he blocked a massive downward overhead strike from Locta, but under the strange magic, his styluses could not hold forever. Already their edges began to chip and crack under Locta's new power. Scream had to do something, and quick. He would not die to the defect. Not here. Forcing Locta's blade back, Scream then kicked him in the chest, buying him enough time to flee towards a downed transport. With acrobatic grace, he leaped up its wing and onto its hull, staring down at Locta. I don't know what it is they've done to you, Locta, but it matters not. I'm not going to die by your hands. This ends now. Looking up and beyond Scream, Locta beheld the growing ball of flame approaching the world. Was it some sort of meteor strike? No. As he looked closer, it was a ship. A supercarrier. Around it rang out explosions from the mountainside orbital defense cannons blasting through its hull, but it still plummeted right for them. Locta had to finish this fast, lest they all died in a ball of flame. He glared back at Scream. Well, come on then. End it. Show me all that selfishness has granted you, and I will show you what faith has granted me. With a mighty battle roar, Scream leaped and flipped through the air, crashing down at Locta with a strike primed to sever his head from his shoulders. Locta, however, was ready for him, and at the very last moment swung the blackened tears up through the air. The visceral vibration of metal carving through flesh reverberated through the hilt before he rolled aside and let Scream crash to the ground. He then turned about to witness what he had done. On the ground before him laid both of Scream's arms, severed at the elbow, whilst their owner writhed and gritted his teeth in bitter agony on his knees beyond them. Swinging his blade as to flick Scream's silvered blood from its surface, Locta held the blackened tears in his right hand as he stormed over to the now armless Scream. It was time to finish this nonsensical bloodshed. He stood before Scream as the battle raged on around them, lifting Scream's chin with the broadside of his sword tip so that Scream may look him in the eyes as he spoke. However, even when crippled and under such pain, Scream still got the first words. What kind of monster have you become? He sputtered through his gnashing teeth. All your selfishness, all the greed and apathy that made you the bitter creature you and so many in the UCS are. I am everything our people once were, what they could be again. Everything you are not. Locta brought his blade back in both hands, and then suddenly swung wide at Scream's neck, severing his head from his shoulders, bringing a final yet bittersweet end to a rivalry long outstaying its welcome. Even as Scream's headless and disarmed body collapsed before his feet, the battle was not yet over, not as he had hoped, as Clonfear and Clepathian still fought in chaotic desperation for survival. All of a sudden, a massive explosion boomed from behind him, the hot shockwave rattling his bones, and then another blasted in the distance before him, followed by more and more all around. He looked up and saw the burning ship was not only on a suicidal collision course, but was raining hell from its still functioning cannon batteries. Knowing he and everyone else would die if they stayed here, Locta raised up his blade and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Everyone, fall back!" Locta and the Clonfear collapsed into full retreat, seeing the falling supercarrier come down upon them like a massive winged dagger. Foot by foot or by jet cycle, they sprinted in a desperate attempt to clear the impact zone. The other Clepathians scattered and ran in all directions as well, but it was every being for themselves. The swift-footed Clonfear easily bolted out of danger, but Locta and the other Clepathians were far from being as quick, and Locta was right at the very epicenter of the coming impact. Staring up in awe at the crumbling ship, sensing no way for him to retreat, he closed his eyes and prayed to the creator he never prayed to before. His prayers were suddenly interrupted as he was snatched up by one of the Clonfear jet cycle riders. Come on, Locta, let's get out of here," said the Clonfear. "But what about the rest back there?" Locta cried out, looking behind him as the remaining Clepathians panicked and scattered. "They're in the creator's hands now, I'm afraid," said the Clonfear. Locta couldn't help but stare back at the supercarrier, christened the Teleclix by the name on the side of its burning hull, close to impact the surface. In a mighty, blindingly blindingly bright explosion, followed by a massive ear-splitting shockwave nearly hurtling the jet cycle into the air, the battle came to a final, explosive end. Hello, White Hammer. Good to see you. Welcome on in to some reading. Locta uncovered his eyes, and when his temporary blindness from the blast faded, all he could see was smoke and fire on the horizon. All there was in the wake of this conflict was scorched blood and silent ruin. Locta barely believed he survived. In fact, many of the Clonfeyar peacekeeper forces still remained, as their jet cycles regrouped with the one Locta rode upon. Some of them even smiled in victory, but all Locta could feel was a surreal sort of grayness. The surviving Clonfeyar swarmed into the streets of the walled city, many of the civilian Clonfeyar coming out of their homes and shops as to cheer and congratulate the soldiers, but Locta remained stoically numb. He was brought to the steps of the central palace where the High Lord, his council, and Algoris awaited the return of their troops, having observed the battle from afar. Locta dismounted the jet cycle and walked up the steps. "Once again, I had my doubts, Locta," said High Lord Valakor, "and once again you shatter them. You are to be forever honored for this victory." Locta shook his blood and grime-covered head. "Victory?" He questioned Valakor's choice of words with shock in his fatigued eyes. "My hand was forced. We survived, but I wouldn't call it a victory, High Lord. I want to save my people, not hurt them like this." "True as that may be, you must not be so short-sighted to see the implications of the potential outcomes here." Algoris consoled him over the cheering crowds. "Wars are not won on battlefields, but in the hearts of those fighting. This is true, but it is one thing to hold faith, and another to be blinded by it. Sometimes, oftentimes, we must drink our medicine, even if it tastes bitter." "But how many out there could have been redeemed? How many are forever lost because of the slaughter? Are such means really justified for the ends?" Locta pleaded for an answer with his sword pointed out at the smoking horizon. Algoris gave a slow, mournful nod as he spoke. "Your predecessor thought so. Though he was the zealot, the most ferocious fighter of all who carried your name, his weakness was in his hatred for bloodshed. In the end, he found meaning of a just war, a war fought not out of conquest or economic squabbles, but a war fought out of necessity for survival. This battle you have fought is like a small ripple of that time in the past during the primordial conflicts, an echo of ancient history, and a whisper that the end of an era has come. To get through the forest, you must first endure its briars." He gulped and looked up to Locta, taking a breath to explain further to his troubled pupil, and perhaps friend. "What occurred on this day has sealed the beginning of a new era, and one you will flagship. Such bloodshed is dark and terrible indeed. There is no celebration in that, but nothing is bought without due sacrifice. Their souls are in the hands of the Creator now. He will judge them, for he is the highest form of justice. The crushing defeat of the UCS ground troops will massively delay them, buy us the necessary time we need to put the Creator's will into motion, and, of course, give me time to teach you." I guess I understand," said Locta with a dismal frown, still staring at the great plumes of smoke rising over the horizon. "Can you really promise that the Creator will treat them fairly in the hereafter?" Algoris nodded. "If there is one thing to be certain of in all reality, it is the Creator's justice. Where one soul departs after death will be a reflection of not just their deeds, but their spirits. No mortal can know for certain where they or anyone else goes." "But I'm not just any mortal, am I?" asked Locta with a perceptive stare down at Algoris. "Could I possibly see their destinies?" Algoris took a deep breath, uncertain how to answer. "Perhaps, in time, when you are ready. You still have much to learn. Some I will teach you, but mostly from what awaits you on the journey ahead. You have much room to grow until you reach where he stood, and even surpass him in some ways. We should be wise with the time bought for us, for it will not last." Algoris then looked up at High Lord Valakor. "Valakor, your highness, I ask permission for Locta and I to depart to my estate, so that our lessons may begin immediately." "Permission granted, Algoris," said Valakor with a nod of his crowned head. Thus Algoris and Locta began to depart down the steps. "And Locta?" Locta looked over his shoulder at Valakor, who saw the uncertainty for the future still lingering in his tired eyes. The High Lord gave an encouraging salute. "Good luck." Okay, that was the end of part 1 and, or yeah, chapter 18 of part 1. So, to recap that entire part, wow, I finished a lot earlier than or finished those two chapters a lot earlier than I thought today. To recap those two parts, it is discovered that Krepto actually put a tracker bug on Locta when he was in prison, knowing he would get escaped. Locta, um, what is it? Locta tried to confront the UCS armies invading Chelor, and tried to ask them to stand down and give a chance at peace. However, because of Scream, they did not. Krepto, feeling guilty over his betrayal of his friend and someone possibly more important than a friend, uh, decided to do a suicidal attack run, uh, calling all of his crew to abandon ship and by himself commanding the ship to plummet to the ground while firing on the battle below. Fortunately, or unfortunately, most of the Clonfeyar and Lagta as well were able to retreat before the explosion took them. And Scream has finally been killed as well. His arms cut off at first and then finally decapitated by Lagta on the battle before the battle's end. And now Lagta and Algoris, in the aftermath of the battle, have been bought time since most of the UCS ground forces have been destroyed, and they're going to use that time to try and, well, train Lagta for the greater battles to come, the real battles. And thus we enter part 2 of Chasing the Dawn, A Savior Reborn. That's an old picture. I think I redid this picture once before, but oof. That's old, that's rough. Alright. I'm gonna take a sip of coffee here. Chapter 1, Part 2. Lessons learned. That was a close one. Try again, said Algoris at the sight of the shot. With a frustrated and exhausted sigh, Locta took the arrow from his quiver and knocked it against the string of the hand-carved bow. He drew it back and slowed his breathing, ignoring the late evening heat of the sun as best he could to reach out with his spirit in a manner Algoris had instructed him before, controlling his supernatural perception, his celestial sight. With his sight blinded by the cloth wrapped around his face, his physical eyes were made useless to aid him in his goal, hitting the small wild foal native to Purgatory. Listening carefully, trying to see in ways beyond the physical for its primitive, subtle presence for perhaps the 100th time this day, he steadily aimed his arrow. Then, he felt the time was right. He let the string loose. With a twang of the bowstring, the arrow flew through the air, and then... thump! It missed yet again. Algoris, standing at his side, shook his head in disapproval. You are distracted, growing agitated and impatient. You must tame these feelings. Having spent the last 8 hours on this lesson alone, Locta reached his breaking point. He dropped the bow to the ground, pulled off the blindfold, and tossed it down as well with a disgruntled sigh. You know what? I give up. I don't see the point in it. Why don't I just shoot the dumb bird without the blindfold like I've done every time before? Now what challenge would there be in that? Asked Algoris as Locta sat down on a nearby mossy stump. Locta didn't answer, rolling his eyes and looking away while Algoris leaned on a staff. Knowing his student was frustrated, Algoris walked over to him and lent the wisdom Locta failed to understand. The point isn't making the mark, you see. If the goal was truly to kill the foal, then I would not have given you the blindfold. Then what is the point? To make me upset? Asked the irate Locta, wiping the sweat from his brow in the hot evening sun. Algoris took a flask from his pack on the ground, pouring it half full of water from his own flask and offering it up to Locta. In a way, yes. Algoris began to explain with a smirk as Locta took the flask and guzzled it down. If you get so angry with something as silly as trying to hunt a small forest chicken blindfolded, then how will you discipline yourself when faced with true adversity? You wish to grow strong and powerful, but that cannot be yours if you fail to be humble. You are, and always will still be, mortal in many ways, and you cannot forget that, he said, patting Locta on the shoulder. Locta still maintained his grumpy disposition, staring down at the strutting bird in the distance on the grassy plateau as if it were mocking him. Algoris looked down at the bow, then back at Locta. This was of the more difficult lessons, one those of your name always struggled with, so don't feel too bad. The truth is that you were never meant to hit the animal in the first place, but to see the absurdity of it all and act upon it. Yet you heeded my instruction earlier without question. Algoris pointed down at the blindfold laying in the grass. Your celestial sight cannot see animals, for they lack spirits. Trying to hunt them with a blindfold on for you is no easier than it would be for anyone else. It really isn't my place to question a teacher, I thought. Locta shrugged, sitting hunched over in disappointment. Oh, but it is, insisted Algoris as he began to pace around his student. It is through questions which we both learn, such as the questions you ask me now, and the understanding thus bestowed upon us both as a result. Locta thought for a moment, looking at the clucking wild bird in the distance, surrounded by many missed arrows, and then back at Algoris. If my lesson was one of humility here, then what was yours? He asked Algoris. Algoris smiled at Locta and wagged his finger. Ah, then you are understanding quickly. My lesson? I suppose it is the same lesson it was and always will be, to better know and teach you. It has been 2 weeks now since our lessons began atop this plateau, and sometimes I fear as if my methods in teaching are not the best. Perhaps I should have told you earlier the meaning behind the blindfolded bow, and now the day is almost at its end because I did not. He rubbed his chin just behind the beak tip of his mouth. Guess there's always tomorrow then. Locta stood up, grabbed the bow again. He knocked another arrow this time, without the blindfold, He knocked another arrow and, this time, without the blindfold, struck the bird clean through its neck in one fluid motion. 2 weeks of practice showing itself well. As for now, I am looking forward to dinner. Algoris chuckled and held his hand up. Slow down there. We still have evening meditation, he said. It'll be perfect timing while the stewards prepare the bird. Meditating on an empty stomach doesn't sound ideal, if you ask me, said Locta as he picked the pack off the ground and slung its strap over his shoulder. Then they both then turned and began their way back towards Algoris' estate. That's another thing you must temper, gluttony, instructed Algoris. Remember, you have no need for such things anymore. That sense of hunger or thirst you feel is entirely in your mind, and since you have already been learning to temper it, notice how today you did not have breakfast or lunch, when 2 weeks ago you were eating 3 square meals a day. I suppose you have a point, but I hardly think enjoying a meal counts as gluttony, Locta said, swatting a bothersome summer insect away off his right ear. Then again, even if it's not everyone out there gets to enjoy such a pleasure now that I think about it. Algoris looked up and to his right at Locta as he walked. You learn quickly indeed, he said. They soon came to the doors of the tall, isolated estate. It was a large and ancient building, shaped like a Gothic cathedral on the outside, built atop a grassy plateau among the mountain ranges nearby Ukranor. From there, one could see the gleaming city as well as the valley below, a valley still covered with the ruins of the battle 2 weeks prior. Locta tried not to look at it every time they passed. He kept his eyes on the doors ahead as they reached for them, the 2 guards standing at the sides stiff as ever. With the doors open, Locta and Algoris stepped into the estate's inviting, well-decorated interior. It was where Algoris and all other prophets of the light before him lived and learned, passing down knowledge first bestowed upon them by Carpathian mystics and Locta's immediate predecessor, the Zealot, over 25,000 years prior. The Clanfear lived relatively short lives in comparison to Carpathians, only 500 years. Many of the relics within the cases displayed upon the walls would have been fairly recent to a middle-aged Carpathian. Algoris approached one of the stewards who maintained and lived within the estate as servants of the prophets, and told him of the wildfowl they shot. The steward bowed silently and left to retrieve it. None of the occupants, aside from Locta and Algoris, spoke at all. When Locta questioned this upon first arriving here, almost immediately after the Battle of Purgatory, Algoris explained they were under oaths of silence, an act of humbling oneself. Like nearly every other teaching, both those meant for all and those meant specifically for Locta, this too was passed to them on that ancient pilgrimage. What Locta did not understand was how the Zealot understood so much more about the nature of reality than he did. Locta knew as much about reality as was known about the first incarnation, the repentant. That was to say, Locta knew as much about reality as was known about the first incarnation, the repentant. That was to say, he knew almost nothing at all. Still, he felt so blind, weak, and small in this universe, a universe far larger than he once thought. An even greater mystery was the purpose behind these incarnations, of which Algoris made no mention. All Locta knew was that he was not entirely Carpathian, not entirely mortal even, but one among them at the same time. He knew he was also to be the last of the incarnations, and that in itself sat like a foreboding weight upon Locta's gut, much like the guilt he still felt from the battle in the valley below. Algoris led Locta up a spiral staircase to a small, dark, circular room without windows or decoration. There was only a few cushions to sit upon, and a mass of scented candles directly on the middle of the floor. With a flick of his finger, Algoris ignited their wicks with a magical flame, giving a soft glow to the otherwise dark room. He sat cross-legged on one side, with Locta sitting on the opposite. Meditation and reflection was always reserved for the evening. Leading Locta as always, Algoris began. And so, what have we learned today? Humility, that though I have other things in life meant for me, it does not make me any greater than those around me. Though each species has their purpose and place, we are all one in the Creator's eyes, said Locta as if reciting out of a textbook. This concerned Algoris, who peered across the candle flame at Locta for a long moment, stunning his pupil. Your words are correct, but they are unclear. You are troubled by something. With a confessing sigh, Locta nodded. I'm sorry, Algoris, but I still can't get over all that carnage in the valley below. I can't help but think that maybe I should have tried something different. Maybe I failed. Their screams still haunt you. Algoris gave a sympathetic nod. Locta shook his head. No, it's not the screams that haunt me, but the silence. Those who... He paused and gulped before forcing himself to finish. Those who I was forced to kill. It's not right. Not what I wanted for them or any of my people. I want to help them, not hurt them. Algoris rubbed his scaly chin in careful consideration, taking a deep breath of the candle-fragrant air before exhaling. Indeed, you are correct. Algoris nodded solemnly. As necessary as it may have been, there was no glory to be found in that bloody hour, least of all for you. Perhaps we should focus on meditation there instead. That battle clings to you still, confusing your compass as it calls to you like a question left unanswered. Let us answer then, and put it to a peaceful rest. He bowed his head and closed his eyes. Locta followed his lead, closing his own eyes and clasping his hands together in front of his abdomen. After a moment of steadying their breaths, Locta saw only through the eyes of spirit, the distractions of the physical universe slipping away. He could see Algora's spirit near him, beholding him for what a mortal truly is, a spirit and body, a body and spirit, a one-way mirror through which most could see out of, but not into. Through Locta's celestial sight, the glass shattered. Algoris knew this and used it to speak to him in ways of the spirit. A memory surfaced through the fog, a vision of the battle clarifying before his eyes. He watched all of it repeat itself, seeing him and all those present like an invisible ghost from the outside. Waves of dread and guilt overcame him, with each felled by his hand, souls he wished to save. Soon, however, Algoris spoke. Shh, do not fear. I have brought you here so that we may face that which troubles you together, he said, his voice like a reverberating echo coming from all directions, reassuring him that this was just a memory. Behold the combatants on the field of battle, the Clonfeyar and the Clepathians. Observe how the Clepathians fight. Perceive the emotions within them. What do you see? The movements of battle slowed to a crawl, every motion and emotion becoming clear as day. Locta could hear their shouts, feel their adrenaline, and perceive their confusion. I see desperation, anger, fear, said Locta through his thoughts. So much fear. And why do you think that is? Asked Algoris. Locta replied back to the first thought which came to his mind. The Clonfeyar, the real Clonfeyar, caught them off guard. They were not ready. They died as a result. Oh? I don't believe that is the real truth, said Algoris, taking Locta forward through the battle where he clashed with Scream, freezing the memory at this moment where their blades first met. A soldier to their master is like a child to their father. They reflect those who teach and lead them. You know this to be true, as your blade met his for the first time. But Scream didn't train them all. He only led them in this one battle. Locta did not understand. The sound of his blade clanging against Scream's stylus echoing through his mind, though time was frozen. Algoris replied, "Precisely. He too has masters, and those masters have their own. All of them reflect each other. Thus, if you follow it back to its source, you will see the root of the sphere and all its evil." Locta looked into the memory of Scream again, searching deep within as if tunneling through the remembered hatred in his eyes. He dug and dug, following it all the way back to one who matched his malice on the day Locta was sentenced. Caltethus? Locta questioned. Algoris hesitated, seeing Locta's own memories of Caltethus, faint and few, but always in fear. "No, not quite, but you are close. Caltethus, like those he surrounds himself with, and those who stand on the throat of the Clopathians, is driven by something beyond them. Everything, every action, every emotion must have a first mover. Now that you know this, look again within those whom I speak of, and you will see how our dark adversaries hide in plain sight, festering in the hearts of mortals where they may burn their souls." Locte gasped slightly as he felt the cold darkness radiating from the hearts of those in battle, as he found himself observing again, reflecting those who they serve, reflecting the Clopathian people as a whole. What he once perceived as mere flesh, he could now see beneath the surface. This fear, this hatred, it was not born in of itself, but from something truly vile festering within them like a parasite. He then looked within the Clan Fayar and saw no such blight, their pure selves beyond the veil of flesh surrounded by a shining bulwark of conviction, faith, and selflessness. They infected them, infected us, because we let them in, Locta realized aloud in his thoughts, perceiving the nature of this disease. We traded our culture and our faith for greed and carnal pursuits. Such personal lust giving all of us over to apathy and wrath towards one another, unable to see past our own desires. That's why the Clopathians fell that day. They gave up all these things and vile sickness took its place. Excuse me, throat's getting a little dry. I'll take a sip of water here. Algoris nodded, his eyes still closed and his lips still sealed, but he spoke through spirit. "Now you see what has become of the Clopathian people. They feast on the temporary food that will decay. They do not feast upon the bread of life that does not perish. Culture, faith, family, honor, virtue. All of that which is eternal is that which the Clopathians have forgotten. It is dead to them, for they have defeated themselves and do not wish to hear. For they have deafened themselves and do not wish to hear. They are slaves to an evil they know not." So those dead on the battle, if they don't know, can they truly be blamed? Are they forgiven? Locta asked hopefully, returning his attention to a memory of the fallen. "There is a possibility, but your spirit speaks a different question. By asking this, you are uncertain of the Creator's judgment of them, believing he may judge them wrong," commented Algoris. The Creator is justice, and he will see every soul weighed fairly. Do you see, young Locta? There is nothing to fear, for all things are in the Creator's hands. If they are punished, it is because they are evil indeed, making demons appear as angels of light. If they are innocent of the wrongdoings, victims to deception, then they will be forgiven. You must learn to be shrewd, to see whether they are victims or workers of evil. This will come as you understand the reality of moral law, the reality of virtue and sin. Locta meditated on this for a moment in silence, but then another question arrived to him. If that is the case, then what is my purpose? Why must the Clopathians be saved if they are in his hands after death anyways? To put it in simple terms, even if your neighbor forgives you for destroying his fence, that does not mean he approves of it. Can one really say they love the Creator if they keep willingly offending him? The Creator is not an usher of death, but a father of life, Algoris explained. If the Clopathians are to fail, they will be used as pawns to bring pain and sin to all others in the universe. Since their very first breaths, the Clopathians have always been of interest to our demonic foes. It is one thing to die ignorant, but ignorance does not always grant innocence. Better to have a map on the journey to righteousness than to stumble blindly. Think back on your people, how many of them reflect their masters with their spite and selfishness, and how much pain and despair they spread to those around them. Now, imagine the future when such things are spread beyond this galaxy. Imagine all the darkness and pain that will be wrought. There will be no light. The universe will be like little more than a second hell made by mortals from the influence of the demons who envy them. And like the angels who fell to the demons, mortals will be lost. That which they feed upon, that which is temporary, will perish, and there will only be death and suffering. Sin, whether one is aware of it or not, is death. That is why we must open their eyes, and that is why you must open yours to make careful judgments in the future. Because the life hereafter reflects who one was in life, Locta inferred. But then how do I fix this? How do I heal them? Algoris mused at the question. All things in the universe, all things are bought with sacrifice, and to heal such a profusely bleeding wound infecting all the universe would take an ultimate and perpetual final sacrifice, he said. The sacrifice of who? Asked Locta. Hesitantly, Algoris paused for a moment before answering the question, or before answering carefully. To redeem the sins of a whole civilization would take the sacrifice only the Creator is capable of. Do not yet fear, however, for not all Clepathians are corrupted and led astray. Indeed, there exist a few who still hold to faith, who stand like lights in the darkness. Let us silence our thoughts to meditate on these few, pray for them as well, for in time they will aid us. Locta sensed deflection in Algora's answer, as if he didn't want to tell him the whole truth. However, Locta saved his questions and did as Algoris instructed, silencing his thoughts as Algoris silenced his. He focused on the faithful few, perceiving the entirety of the galaxy and seeking them out through his spirit in methods transcending time and space. He could hear their prayers, sense their devotion, but something was strange. All of it he heard as if it were directed to him. The whispers of their own spirits reached out to him. They were an almost deafening cacophony, but it was not painful to hear. It was warming, as if under the love of many. That was, at least, until he could hear one praying whispers out of many, sounding so familiar to him. That was, at least, until he could hear one praying whisper out of many, sounding so familiar to him. No, could it be? Could he still somehow be alive? Yes, Locta saw this prayer back to its source, and knew it was him. He was here, on Purgatory, so alone and pained. His heart pounded fast. He gasped, and his concentration was broken. He's alive! Locta suddenly exclaimed as he snapped out of his meditation. What? Who? Algoris blinked, opened his eyes, and questioned. Krepto, my friend, he's alive, on this planet. Locta trembled with both excitement and worry simultaneously. He sprang up from the cushions and started to scramble to the stairs. I've got to find him. Make sure he's okay, and... Algoris stood up and protested. Hold on, Locta. Slow down, he insisted, holding out his hands in a halting gesture. Krepto may be alive indeed, but I fear he may not be in the best state of mind for a friendly reunion. All the more reason for me to go to him, Locta rationalized. I'm sure we can pick up this lesson later. I owe Krepto far too much to ignore him now. With a disappointed sigh as he pinched his snout and shook his head, Algoris reluctantly agreed. Very well, but be careful, he instructed Locta like a father would a child. Yeah, sure thing, Locta exclaimed quickly as he rushed down the stairs and straight out the door and into the late evening sun. He scurried through the grass around to the back of the estate, mounting atop a parked jet cycle, hitting the ignition and speeding off down the mountainside. Following a trail through the woods, the wind blowing his ears and tail back behind him as he sped, he tracked Krepto's prayer to its source. Slowing down near a bend in the trail, he locked down the jet cycle and looked deep into the woods. Though it was dark and difficult to see so late in the day, Locta unsheathed the blackened tears from his hip and cautiously stepped forward. After creeping through the woods for a few minutes, he came upon a cave dug into the steep forested mountainside. Its opening almost evaded Locta, being covered in roots and leaves, but not far from its entrance was a small, smoldering pit of ash, a fire pit. Locta knew this had to be the place where Locta sought refuge, and thus, with his sword held close, he pushed aside the vines and slowly stepped within. Remembering one of the many ways to channel the light as Algoris had recently taught him, Locta ignited his weapon, Holy Flame. The warm glow chased away the shadows, but even in the light, there was no sign of Krepto. If he was here before, he certainly wasn't here now. Locta stepped out of the cave, confused and disappointed as he looked around the cave entrance once more. Still, there was no trail or Clepathian footprints about indicating where Crepto could have went. But then, his keen ears heard something. It was not the twittering birds or crickets of the evening forest, but something foreign to this world. Something metallic and sharp. With a sudden swish heard through the air, Locta turned around just in time to deflect the source of the noise. A Clepathian Stylis's. However, as he looked into the eyes of his attacker, the gilded axe-like blades were not just any Clepathians. Crepto, wait! It's me! Locta cried out, but Crepto only returned a bitter growl as he attacked again. Locta held his sword up and caught the downward strike, and despite Crepto's rage, the force of his attacks were weak from hunger. He shoved the Stylises to the side, and Crepto attacked again, but stumbled forward clumsily out of fatigue, falling over to the ground on his hands and knees. Locta blinked in confusion, not understanding what was wrong with his friend. Come on then, kill me! Do it, please! Crepto panted as his elbows wobbled in trying to support his weight. Instead, however, Locta sheathed his sword and knelt down at Crepto's side. He put his three-digited hand on Crepto's shoulder and gently shook him. Crepto, it's me. Locta. Locta? No, the Locta I knew is dead. And I betrayed him, panted Crepto, his breath turning to quick, dry sobs as he was too dehydrated for tears to show. I was his friend. He trusted me. But as the tome said, there would be one among him who would betray him. Locta blinked and leaned back as he saw that Algoris was right. Crepto was frazzled and outright delirious from starvation. He was filthy from head to toe, covered in a torn uniform hanging loose from his famished body. His voice was hoarse, his movements weak, and his fur matted with dried blood from the scabbed-over wounds beneath. It was little wonder why his mind had difficulty thinking clearly, but Locta was not so easily dissuaded from giving up on the only one of his kind whom he could call a friend. With a firm grip on his shoulders, Locta forced Crepto over to his side so he could look upon him instead of staring at the ground. Crepto, look at me! Crepto blinked once, twice, and then thrice as the gears slowly turned in his aching head. Locta sat on his knees, staring him in the eyes as Crepto looked into his. Locta? But how are... Shh, don't think too hard, Locta said gently. You've clearly been through a lot, and I know my new appearance might confuse you, but you just need to know that I'm still plain old Locta on the inside. He smiled and patted his shoulder. Crepto cautiously eyed Locta's hand as Locta spoke. We were friends, Crepto. Maybe we can still be friends, despite our allegiances, I hope. Friends. Yes. Yeah, I remember now, said Crepto, starting to shed his delirium. But why do you look so odd? What happened to you? He questioned, looking up at Locta not with disdain, but with honest confusion. Why do you still spare me even after you turned against us? Locta took a breath and took his hand from Crepto. Turn against you? Is that what the tome said? They said he would descend upon us a third time, Crepto explained from his vague memory, and the Clepathians would reject him. He would make allies with their enemies, and would spread heavenly vengeance, or something. I don't remember? He groaned, rubbing his aching head as he sat up on his knees. Locta pondered Crepto's words for a minute, knowing at this point these tomes no doubt spoke of him. Of these tomes, Algoris also had copies, but like Crepto, he forbade Locta from reading them. At least now Locta understood why. If he were to, his very free will could interfere with the Creator's intentions for him. He was not to know by book, but to believe by choice. That was why he was the faithful. It was faith alone which carried him. Heavenly vengeance, eh? Locta mused with a humorous smirk, looking down at the blade at his hip. Well, if your survival means anything, it proves that not all Clepathians need to be sent from this life into the Creator's judgment so swiftly. In fact, I'm hoping for the opposite. Then, I was wrong? Crepto looked off in the distance, towards the direction of the valley in horror. Oh no, what have I done? He cupped his hand over his mouth, his shoulders slumping and his ears drooping. Locta felt the sheer guilt radiating from him, knowing that he must have been aboard that crashed ship. Whatever it is you've done, Crypto, it can be forgiven. The UCS will never forgive me. They probably believe I'm dead anyways. Crypto shook his head dismally, sitting up with his back to a tree stump. You want to know the truth? The whole reason the attack started was because I planted a tracking device on you when you were in prison. Caltethis somehow knew you would escape and lead us right to the Clan VR. Now do you see why I should be dead? I betrayed you, Locta. I betrayed all of us. Locta blinked, stunned at Crypto's confession. At first, he felt a pulse of anger at Crypto planting a tracking device on him, but as quickly as it came, it faded. He remembered what Algoris said, how some are workers of evil, while others are victims. The wounded one whimpering in guilt before him was now a clear example of a latter. Perhaps, maybe the UCS won't, maybe the Clopathian people won't, but I will forgive you. And if you want it, the Creator will too, said Locta, putting his hand over his chest. Crypto looked up at him, staring for a moment before slowly shaking his head with an odd, weak smile. You still don't know? Don't know what? Locta tilted his head curiously. What you are. You still don't know, do you? Crypto asked, still smiling. Locta looked down with his brow knitting in thought, then back at Crypto. I know that I'm some kind of reincarnation of the past, representing the last of the three creators' aspects. My predecessor, Zeal and Penance, came before in a time when they were needed. The Clopathians needed them to show them light through whatever darkness blinded them. I suppose it's my duty to do the same now. So the Clonfeyar didn't tell you either, Crypto mused with a nod. Tell me what? Asked Locta. Crypto glanced at him before looking off in the distance. It's, well, something you have to find out from yourself. You're right in some ways about what you are, but at the same time, so wrong. Oh, so very wrong. Locta opened his mouth as to question Crypto further, but he shook his head and sighed. Algoris, too, refused to tell him the whole truth about what he was. Though it frustrated him and boggled his mind like an incessant itch that refused to go away, he understood that some things had to be learned in particular ways. Some things had to be learned not through a teacher, but through oneself. Locta wondered when he'd finally understand what he was, and whether he'd come to embrace it, or flee it. Perhaps, in the future, he'd know, but for now, he focused on his friend. Crypto, however, was one step ahead of him, as always. He slowly stood up. These Clonfeyar, if they truly took you in, if they are the ones meant to guide you, then maybe they're not our enemies, as we all thought, said Crypto, looking down at where Locta knelt, studying his armor, his large tail, and three-digited hands curiously. Locta could indeed tell Crypto knew something he didn't, just as Algoris and so many other Clonfeyar did. Every time he tried to see it in them, all he saw was a thick fog. After a moment of staring, Crypto continued. But, Locta, as a friend, can you really assure me that they will look upon me as a friend as you do? Will they trust me after all we've done to them? Locta stood up and nodded. They will. They are loving people, a faithful and merciful sort. I believe the Clopathians could learn a lot from them, just as they once learned from us thousands of years ago. He then started walking back the way he came, waving Crypto to follow after him. Come on, I'll show you. I think you and Algoris would get along well. Take a drink here. Ooh. With a deep breath and uncertain shifting gaze, Crypto let out a sigh and trusted Locta. It's only fair after you trusted me that I trust you. Let's get going then. He set out with Locta back to where his jet cycle was parked. Locta activated the hovering machine, straddling it as if it were a steed. Crypto hopped on the back, holding fast on the passenger side handles at the rear of the machine. Once he knew Crypto was secure and ready, Locta turned the bike around and accelerated back up the mountainside trail. So how did you manage to find me? Crypto asked, raising his voice over the screech of the jet engine and billowing of the wind. I was meditating with Algoris when I could hear you praying somehow. When I heard your voice, I kind of followed it and knew about where you were, Locta answered back. To be honest, I didn't even know you were part of the attack. Were you aboard that crashing ship? Crypto nodded. Yeah, I was. I was the one responsible for it, he confessed. I I don't know what came over me. I just felt so guilty and lost after hearing you speak. Scream betrayed my orders to stand down, and I just snapped under all that pressure. I thought we were doomed because, well, Crypto trailed off, finding it difficult to explain or rationalize himself without saying too much. I understand, Locta said as they sped out of the forest and onto the grassy plateau, slowing down as they approached the large estates building silhouette against the twinkling stars of the early night sky. I should have known Scream had something to do with it, but he finally got what was coming for him, he said as he coasted the jet cycle around back of the building, parking it and locking it down. He dismounted, with Crypto dismounting as well. You don't seem as beat over it as I thought you'd be. You don't seem as beat over it as I thought you'd be, commented Crypto. Locta led him around to the front of the building, speaking back over his shoulder as Crypto followed him. For a time, I was. In a way, I still am. I still wish there could have been some way to change his mind and heart. But not everyone will change, even if they can. Free will is as much a curse as it is a blessing. Scream chose to fight me and throw away the lives of those he was responsible for, and he paid the price. I just hope that the others manipulated by him are forgiven. So you killed him, then? Good riddance, I say, said Crypto with a fold of his arms, looking left to the valley far below where the fire still glowed. Maybe for that one, but our true enemies aren't. Maybe for that one, but our true enemies aren't any mortals. Our enemies are those corrupting their hearts and wishing to enslave us under sin and death, said Locta, facing ahead and continuing to walk forward. My purpose is to save them, not to punish them. Crypto simply eyed Locta silently from behind, finding his last statement ironic, but said nothing yet. They came around to the front of the ancient building, and at either side of the door were the two silent Clonfeyar guards as always. They paid no mind to Locta, but eyed Crypto with caution, their hands resting near their belts, inches away from their deactivated light blades. Locta gave them both a reassuring smirk. He's with me, don't worry. Reluctantly, the Clonfeyar relaxed themselves as Locta pushed the doors open. Locta led Crypto inside the cozy candlelit interior. Before them in the main hall, Algoris sitting with his high-backed chair near. Before them in the main hall was Algoris, sitting within his high-backed chair near the warm, crackling fire pit, sipping tea as he read a dusty old book. As Locta and Crypto approached him, the old Clonfeyar looked up from his book to see the two standing before him. You're back. And this is Crypto, I presume? He is, Locta nodded, gesturing his hand to Algoris, then back at Crypto as he introduced them. Crypto, meet Algoris. Algoris, meet Crypto. Crypto stared at Algoris with suspicion, but Algoris returned only a gaze of mild curiosity. He gestured his hand to the table at his side. Lostorian tea, Crypto? Please, pull up a seat. You look ravaged. Lostorian tea? But how did you get Lostorian tea here? Crypto questioned. Locta grabbed an extra chair from a nearby study table and rolled it into the main hall. He sat in his chair in lieu of his usual seat, offering it to Crypto instead. Or he sat in this chair in lieu of his usual seat, offering it to Crypto instead. Locta took a cup from the teapot and Locta took a cup and the teapot from the table and poured himself a cup of the steaming hot liquid, then looked up to Crypto. It's not exactly like the kind we drink at home, but it's good in its own way once you get the taste for it. I suppose it'd be rude to refuse either way. Crypto sat down apprehensively in the soft chair, pouring himself some tea in a cup as well. Crypto looked into the dark beverage curiously before taking a sip. Traditional Lostorian tea was typically made not with water, but a clarified molten bronze-like metal. Only Clepathians could drink it like this with their high internal body temperatures and insolent of flesh. It was a spicy beverage with a powerful sinus-clearing minty aftertaste that cheaper versions made with water simply did not compare, except this Clonfeyar brew. It wasn't spicy or powerful, but thicker, sweeter, and full of its own unique flavor despite being made with only water. Drinking molten metal would kill a Clonfeyar, as it would most creatures. The stimulating effects of Lostorian tea leaves coursed through his veins, soothing Crypto to where he wanted to just sink in the chair and sit here forever. He opened his eyes and looked at Locta and Algoris, both smiling at him. Between the cozy fire pit, the tea, and Locta's forgiveness, and Algoris' hospitality, he felt so at peace. He felt as if he were at a home away from home. Maybe these Clonfeyar really weren't their enemies after all. Maybe it was Krepto who had been wrong this whole time, but now he was struck with a new problem. Why was he here? Lacta had very important things in store for him in the future, many prophecies surrounding him that he himself did not even know. But for Krepto? Krepto was just a mere Clepathian. What place did he have among one like Lacta? Krepto's thoughts were broken when Algora spoke to Krepto. The leaves came as one of many tokens of peace from Lacta's predecessor. He began answering Krepto's question. I'm not sure if your historians have kept records, but our historians say Lacta and the Zealot came with other Clepathians to us years ago in a time of strife. He brought peace to us, showed us teachings that shaped our people into who we are today, and shared knowledge to be kept safe until his return. He looked at Lacta. Lacta the Faithful here is not a direct resurrection of him, as some of us suspected, but he has proven himself to be the one. There's a Rampardos in chat if anyone wants it. Krepto looked Lacta up and down. So it seems he has. He's told me a little about you, and I can already see that whatever teachings you've given him have taken hold. And he's about as much and he's said much about you over the past couple weeks, Algor's joked with another sip from his cup. He told me that you hold beliefs in things beyond the flesh as well, saying that your grandmother was a mystic. Is it true, Krepto? What do you believe? Well, yeah, but I'm hardly the most devout sort. Krepto sat up with a nervous shift of his eyes. It started more as a curiosity at first, but then I started to see the truth in it. He looked at Lacta. I began to see our people really are sick and broken. All I ever wanted was to serve the UCS and be an example of what it should have been, what it could have been. Now all I care about is what's best for our people, their survival. That's what I believe in. No matter what, that's all that matters. But don't try to loop me into all this hero nonsense. I'm just one. Any old chump with a sharp weapon and wit can be a hero, but no one in this universe can be you, Algorith said with a nod as he looked into Krepto's eyes. I assure you that our intents were never to bring harm to the Clepathians, and that the assassination of Skyreath wasn't by our actions. We simply played along with it. I assumed as much, albeit only when it was too late, said Krepto. I also know you intend to somehow save our people from the greater evils at play. I don't want to be a thorn in your side, but the more you wait around here and drink tea, the closer you get to failure. I have little doubt that Caltethis is fuming in anger and has already been planning ways to counterattack. This time, they won't fail. Lacta looked at Algoris with a slight told-you-so smirk. Algoris' eyes drifted to the floor as he sighed. I feared as much. Lacta still isn't ready. There's so much teaching left to be done, so much he has yet to know and understand. But time never has been on our side. I suppose you are right, Krepto. Finally! Lacta laughed out loud. I was wondering when it'd actually do something for a change. Excuse me. With a reluctant sigh and rub of the central horn at the top of his head, Algoris explained what they'd have to do. The next step to bring an end to the era of darkness before it begins, and replace it with an era of light, is to rally the remaining faithful. The few will serve as the progenitors of what is to be birthed here, and also the first soldiers in this new crusade when our true adversaries show themselves at last. The Clonfeyar are already here and willing to follow, but reaching the Clepathians may prove difficult. I doubt they'll let us in their territory without fighting them, and that's obviously not gonna work, Lacta added while rubbing his chin. Krepto put his cup down on the table, rubbing his hands in thought for a moment. Maybe we don't have to fight, he said, looking at Algoris and Lacta. Oh? Algoris raised a brow in curiosity, seeming almost as if he didn't want any solution to the problem. Hello, Calhis, good to see you. Your people's ships often have cloaking devices. Nothing in the UCS arsenal can detect him that could get us into their territory, suggested Krepto. Algoris stroked his chin with a skeptical squint at Krepto. Indeed. The cloaking devices do not work upon atmospheric entry, and you'll still need to broadcast a landing clearance request, which would also break the cloak. Every gem has its flaw. Lacta then remembered how many transports were left crashed or grounded in the valley below. What if we were to take the ID signatures of one of the wrecked UCS ships? That could give us just enough time to get access to the planetary screening shield and land before they catch on. And then what? Start knocking on doors and asking people if they've heard the good news? That's a one-way trip to getting shot, Crypto mocked sarcastically. Locta eyed Algoris. Surely there's got to be some better way to do this. Know anything, Algoris? Algoris' eyes darted left and right between the two of them as he hesitated. He didn't want Locta to go, not so soon as he still knew so very little. He was not yet strong against the true evils he faced, not yet shrewd enough to perceive them entirely, not yet wise enough to carry out such a crucial decision on his own. He was still young, still naive, still faithful. Perhaps that was another lesson from student to master, Algoris thought as he took a deep breath and sighed in defeat. There is a way. The mystics on Chelor know of it, and if you can reach them, they will know what to do. They will help you. And I know exactly how to get there. Crypto smiled and nodded, rubbing his hands together as the plan came to a whole. Some say coincidences are nothing more than small miracles hiding in plain sight, said Algoris, who placed his empty cup on the table and stood up as the other two before him stood as well. As Locta placed his empty cup down as well, he caught sight of Algoris' disheartened expression out of the corner of his vision. Algoris, something wrong? He asked as he stood back up. With me, perhaps, Algoris confessed with a gulp. It's just been so long since I've had any true company. I've truly enjoyed teaching you, but all good things must come to an end eventually. It just seems so sudden. Locta shook his head sympathetically. Algoris, I'll be back, I promise. If I can come back for Crypto, rest assured that I'll come back for you. I know you will. After all, I did indeed say you will learn far more through experience than lessons and studies. Who am I to be a hypocrite? Algoris' frown grew into an encouraging smile. Now go, Locta and Crypto. Be swift, be safe, be vigilant. He pointed his staff towards the door. There's no time to waste. Let's get to it, Locta said to Crypto, who nodded and followed after Locta. The two left the estate building, leaving Algoris alone and staring at the doors even long after they closed. The old Clonfear then looked down to his small, stubby three-toed feet poking out from beneath his simple robe, and let out a sigh. The one Locta traveled with, Crypto, also had a possible future intertwined with Locta, but it was one far from benign. He went back to the table and opened his book once again, turning it to a dog-eared page to refresh his mind on the matter. The final passage of the page read in old Clefear runes, one of light, one of dark, one of faith, one of knowledge, one of savior, one betrayer. Algoris reclosed the book and stared down at its runic cover in his hands. His eyes shifted as his mind began to race, dreading what the future held. He opened his mouth and muttered that last phrase as it tolled like a bell in his mind. One savior, one betrayer. What are we looking at for time? That'll probably be it for today. We read 3 chapters today. We finished up part 1, the epic battle, and now we're starting part 2. But also, there's another reason why I'm hitting that there. I am not feeling the greatest. I'm feeling very lightheaded and kind of queasy in the stomach for some reason. Maybe it's the changing of the seasons. No idea why. So we'll just... I'm probably gonna end it here, honestly. Very early, I know. I apologize, I'm sorry. But, yeah, not feeling the greatest. What is this? What's going on today with, this person? Let's find someone to, write out to. Let's see. Suppose I could, read you guys in a blue boxy. There's many here this early in stream, but it's whatever. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for those who have enjoyed the reading for today. I really appreciate it. Next Saturday we'll continue. Yeah, sorry for cutting it short. I'm just not feeling the greatest. Tomorrow, Fallout New Vegas. Be there, be square. And, yeah, hope you have a good rest of your day. That's it. Much love, many hugs, many kisses, and well, bye-bye.